Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is February 20th, 2025. Recently, I found myself discussing politics with my more conservative friends, and I thought I would make a video for y'all, and not some echo chamber microphone for rightfully pissed off liberals and empaths. Fellow bleeding heart liberals, this isn't what Cenk did with Turning Point USA, trust me. In fact, I'm going to try and accomplish what he said he wanted to. I want to keep the message straightforward and not condescending, because to the folks who are willing to listen, you deserve the mutual respect from me as well. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to take it easy on the people this is about. So, if I can only ask you to set aside your personal beliefs for a moment and approach this as objectively as possible, maybe we can find some common ground, because I think there is much that we can agree upon. If you are a conservative and find anything of what I have to say of interest or thought-provoking, drop a red heart in the comments and show us, liberals, that there are folks out there willing to hear us out. And to my fellow, more liberal-minded folks, y'all know what to do. Drop a blue heart in the comments and show our conservative brothers and sisters that we, too, are willing to find foundations of decency against common enemies. Because at the end of all of this, no matter the conclusion, we're all still Americans. And whether we agree is irrelevant to whether we need to hear each other out. So, here we are. Y'all achieved what I really didn't think was going to occur, because truthfully, I wasn't expecting so many Democrats to sit this out. Conservatives have full control over the House, the Senate, the presidency, and arguably the judiciary in the Supreme Court. This is the reality within which we find ourselves. I don't like it, but I don't have to in order to acknowledge the reality in front of me. So that said, I thought I would have a video cover what I thought I knew to be conservative principles and values as I grew up in a deeply red state, surrounded by proud members of the grand old party. I also thought I would analyze and discover how many of those conservative principles and values the grand old party stands for, as it holds basically exclusive governing power. To do that, I'm going to need to do my best to steelman the idea of conservatism. And that is, I will present conservative viewpoints in their most strong, most reasonable form before responding to it. And if I get anything wrong, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Trolls need not apply, as this is a discussion for grown-ups. I have found that there are about 5 primary driving qualities that moderate and centrist conservatives have when it comes to their odd and seemingly contradictory support for the current administration. Those qualities that I have found that y'all have for Trump and what he's doing are: 1, you see that the establishment is already against you. So there's an argument to be made that government institutions like the DOJ, FBI, mainstream media, etc. are already weaponized against y'all, and so you don't see Trump's current work as a problem and see it more as a necessary countermeasure. 2, less purity and more pragmatism. That is, historically, small government and anti-establishment principles were foundational to be a conservative. The policies that Trump is imposing are seen as a means to an end. If expanding the executive branch's power helps achieve your cultural and economic goals like controlling immigration, fighting the woke mind virus, or even reshaping the judiciary into a political machine, then it's justifiable. 3, you're convinced that Trump is a people's representative and stands for the working class. Instead of seeing Trump as an executive authority who is never satiated with more power and money, you see his expansion of government as being on behalf of the people and not in any way self-serving. You see him as a strong man who's fighting entrenched bureaucrats and using the tools of the government against the establishment for a change. 4, a recent shift toward populism over libertarianism. I say this because traditional conservative ideals were historically more libertarian, but there is a marked shift that has been embracing populism, meaning that big government intervention is acceptable when it's benefiting the right people, like closing the borders, regulation of social media platforms, or even punishing or canceling large corporations that appear far too progressive. And 5, the premise that rules for thee, not for me, is actually the liberal playbook. It has been made clear that many conservatives have seen a wide expansion of government when Democrats were in power. When framing it this way, it's seen as a political tool that if they refuse to utilize it when they have the opportunity, it's seen as a form of political surrender. Now, if I've gotten anything wrong, again, by all means, hit me up in the comments below and let's hash this out together as voters in the same country and not enemies on some kind of battlefield. What I want to do is approach these one by one because there has been a very real effort to manipulate all of those points against you, a conservative. The problem is your support may be making it difficult to see. So if you're willing and open to why this is so confounding for us as liberals, I would be much obliged if you'd hear me out. Number one, there's a massive irony to the idea that the establishment is already against you because within this short time frame, Trump has already expanded the very institutions that you're arguing are too weaponized. He's already pressured the DOJ to investigate his political enemies in his first term. He hasn't stopped trying to encourage Congress through his executive powers, and the deep state narrative in itself is contradictory. Many of the officials that conservatives see as members of the deep state were appointed by Trump after telling you that he only picks the best people. And the idea that weaponizing justice is bad only when your opponent is doing it is unjustifiable. To think Democrats did it more, remember that Democrats tried to impeach Trump for bribing President Zelensky of Ukraine to provide political dirt on his then opponent Joe Biden. Yet it was Republicans, not Democrats, who chose not to convict. If you truly do not approve of an offense, you can't ignore it when it's convenient. Doing otherwise betrays your values. Integrity is how you act when your back is against the wall. 2, the pragmatism over purity. I grew up having been told that conservatives were some paragons of small government philosophy. The man that conservatives hold in high esteem today is Ronald Reagan, who established a need to limit government, not simply use it differently. By supporting Trump, you directly undermined literally decades of conservative principle. In fact, during Obama's administration, one of the motivating factors behind the Tea Party was his perceived overreach through regulatory actions and executive orders. I was in the military at the time. I remember it vividly. Yet, as Trump only spends his time not vacationing, he's signing executive order after executive order. And all I have seen is a celebration of Trump doing exactly what so much energy went into literally screaming about. That said, where does it end when a Democrat gets into office and leans on Trump's actions to start erasing his work, but also halt the Second Amendment? What will you be able to say or do when a Democrat starts putting government agents in pews to make sure churches aren't radicalizing their congregations? You see, when you're willing to let so much slide for one, you disqualify yourself from ever holding that opinion going forward, unless you want to tell the world that you're loyal to a party and not a country. 3, the premise that Trump isn't an authoritarian. He's just using his power to fight the entrenched elites, to be a real people's man. And I know we've all heard the phrase, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in the way. Let's start by defining the people, because there is a no true Scotsman fallacy that's just oozing out of this approach. It assumes that only conservatives represent the true will of the people, but this ignores the literal millions of Americans who oppose Trump. Again, he didn't win a mandate. He won a plurality by less than 1.5%. Also remember that Trump didn't use his authority to go after elites. He used the government to go after protesters, journalists, and other conservatives for merely disagreeing with him. Labeled them as rhinos. And again, as with many arguments against the man, if Trump's use of executive power is acceptable because he's doing it in favor of your values, what happens when, let's say Gavin Newsom starts doing it in the next 4 years? Quattro, and this is something that I have perpetually slammed Cenk Uygur on when it comes to his positions. Populism over libertarianism. Currently, the Trump administration is exercising textbook big government conservatism, and it is coming off about as poorly as the Bush-era compassionate conservatism. Interestingly enough, though, conservatives back then were actually able and willing to reject those tactics. Another fascinating aspect to this is that conservatives have criticized government overreach in business for decades ad nauseum. You would think that registering to vote as a Republican came with a free tattoo of a heart with the words free market written across it. Yet, when the corporations are deemed woke or pushing a DEI narrative, it has completely become normal for Republican government leaders to start drafting bills to limit this social phenomena. And probably the most baffling to me, as someone who hasn't stopped hearing the phrase, "I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative," by people who are too afraid to say that they don't know shit about politics, is the fear of government interventions in the hallowed and mythical free market that is constantly talked about, but doesn't actually exist. It's like a unicorn. If the unicorn was trying to actively dismantle OSHA. Free market conservatism has always opposed government intervention when it comes to corporations and markets, unless and until Trump implemented tariffs in historic numbers, he used corporate pressure tactics, and he's bailed out industry after industry. These actions are the epitome of government-driven markets, what conservative Americans have called communism and Marxism. Finally, 5. Rules for thee, not for me. The idea that since liberals have expanded government when it benefits them, so too can and should Republicans. That if conservatives don't fight fire with fire, they'll always lose. I wish I could actually draw a picture to demonstrate how self-defeating this is. What this states is that you no longer have any principles and desire power for power's sake. It implies that you wish for conservative rule over classically liberal representation in a democratic government. Please heed my warning to y'all when I say that when conservatives accept big government under Donald Trump, y'all will never have credibility to oppose it after him. You will demand to be taken seriously by people who will be laughing at you. This is such a short-term gain for such long-term damage to your values. This goes sevenfold for my religious Republicans. The actual heresy and blasphemy that this administration has demonstrated while doing the polar opposite of Christ's teachings has been the only consistent factor in all of this that continues to surprise me. There's currently a money-clad goat with golden hooves at Mar-a-Lago to welcome the guests. I'm not even joking. The idolatry could not be more indisputable. Again, I'm not trying to attack or criticize any of you in this. I don't wish to condescend, but rather discuss. I'm trying to gather how and where these strategies appear fruitful in the future. The modern conservative has at least appeared to have submitted entirely their values and beliefs and abandoned small government policies in favor of a power-hungry ideology. And I would argue that at this point it isn't any longer about conservatism versus liberalism. It's about personality-driven politics above all else. If you can justify the actions now without getting angry or protesting alongside your fellow Americans, how can you credibly oppose anything when, not if, a Democrat chooses to do the same? This may just be an observation on my part, but having grown up in the environment, I thought that I was able to pick up on some things. What I thought was that conservatives were always about decentralized government and empowering the individual, to encourage folks to pick themselves up by the bootstraps and be personally responsible. It was supposed to be about traditional values and principles. But if those principles only apply when it's convenient, then did you ever stand for them to begin with? Where do you want to be in the future? How do you want to be perceived when the enemy you've spent your whole lives warning us about is finally at the gate, but because they're wearing your colors, you're willing to excuse it and trust that they have your best interests at heart? It's up to y'all. I can't make those admittedly difficult choices for you. I can say that if you do choose to come back to democracy, our arms are wide open. I appreciate if you stuck it out this long, and if you consider dropping a heart in the comments, I'd be much obliged. And if you dig my delivery and message, make sure to like and subscribe. It goes a hell of a long way in helping this truly American movement take shape. Y'all come back now. You hear?